Okay, as we begin, once again, I'd like to announce and thank the sponsors for the year of our SHIUR, Dr. and Mrs. Malcolm Marcus, in memory of their beloved aunts Irma Haas and Hilda Meyer, whom I had the schus to know. Once again, we thank them very, very much. Okay, everybody find seats.
How many seats are here? 3. 1?
There's 2 here.
1 seat over here. This is taken.
So there are no more papers? They had a whole bunch of them, no more?
I need a paper.
There's
no more. What?
On the table over here.
On the table outside, there were papers. Are they
No, I
gone?
got the last one there. There was some here.
Some here
On the
too?
last table.
Okay, here's a paper somebody has.
We can share if we have to.
Another paper.
Okay, thank you all for cooperating.
I need the paper.
Okay, so we thanked our sponsors. I'd like to. I know, I'm doing my best. Doing my best. You know what? If some people want to take some white chairs and put them up here, you could sit way up front.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Anybody want to take some white chairs? You can put them up front here, and you can sit up front.
Put chairs over here too. You don't sit, right?
I don't sit.
So we can move this back. We can sit here.
Watch out.
Okay. I also want to thank the many of you who spoke to me about my son's teaching. Really, we're very, lot of nachas from him, and thank you for your comments, and
Where does he teach?
always good to know.
Where does he teach usually?
He teaches in a number of different places, but his primary work is he works for a number of organizations, actually. Okay. We're going to take a look at the second of the 3 patriarchs today. We're going to take a look at Yitzchak. Yitzchak is the most enigmatic. We took a detour studying Purim last week, and now we're coming back to our CHUMASH. We're coming back to the CHUMASH study in depth, and we're going to take a look at Yitzchak. Yitzchak is the most enigmatic of all of the patriarchs. Very little do we know about him. A lot of the drama that surrounds the other Abraham or surrounds Yaakov doesn't surround Yitzchak. His life seems to be very, very seems to be controlled by circumstances rather than controlling circumstances. And to understand him, I think that there are 2 major components that we need to look at that forge and form the tahalich of his life. And we can look, if we look at those two components, perhaps we can understand him better. If you take a look at the first paragraph on page 1, you find it a fascinating medrash from Esther Rabbah, which is appropriate. And in it, Rabbi lists a whole series of people who are the first of. The first of. He says, for example, that Cain is the first murderer. Noach is the first survivor. Yitzchak, Rosh LaNe'ekadim. Yitzchak is the first of the bound. Now that means that we need to take a look at Yitzchak from the perspective of his experience on the altar during the time of Akedas Yitzchak. We often focus only on Abraham. We see the test to be one of Abraham, but Yitzchak is tested as well. And Yitzchak is affected as well, one would assume, by the trauma of that entire event. And do the rabbis discuss that? Do they tell us that in some way he is affected by that? And if they do, then what effect do we see upon Yitzchak, the scene of the Akedah of his father holding that knife over him, ready to sacrifice him, ready to offer him to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So if you take a look at the second of the two paragraphs, the effect, you see in Bereshis, the Torah says, Vayihi ki zaken Yitzchak, vaticheno einav meiraos. It was when Yitzchak was old, and his eyes became weak, literally from seeing. So that's a strange language. Why does it mean from seeing? So the Medrash Rabbah says, Me'ras mikoach osa re'iyah. The blindness was caused, the Medrash says, by the vision of the Akedah, by what he saw at the Akedah. And the Shebishor she'okad Avram Avinu etzpanav al gabe mizbeach bachu malachei ashareis. The angels cried when Yitzchak was bound on the altar. V'noshru dema'os me'einehem l'toch einav v'yirushumos b'toch einav v'kebon shehiskin kihu einav. And those tears were stamped or embedded in his eyes, and when he became old, they caused him to be blind. That's a fascinating medrash. On the one hand, again, you can take a medrash literally, and there are those who do, or you can take a medrash and look at what it's trying to teach. The key issue with the medrash is not its literal truth. The key issue with the medrash is what are the rabbis trying to convey through this medrash, through this study. And I would argue that one way to look at the medrash is to say that he was traumatized by the event. And that affected a number of things in his life that were then marked by that event or shaped by that event in terms of how he dealt with circumstances around him or how he was told to deal with circumstances around him. For example, take a look at the last paragraph on page 1. Vayira baretz milvad harav harishon. There was another famine in the land, aside from the first famine which forced Abraham to go down to Mitzrayim. And Vayelech Yitzchak el Avimelech melech Plishtim Gorah. He went to Avimelech. Vayar elov Hashem vayomer al tered Mitzrayim. Shkol ba'aretz asher amar elecho gur ba'aretz hazos. So what happens is Yitzchak is trying to do what his father did. He is going down through Avimelech's territory. He's going down to where? To Egypt, to Mitzrayim. But Baruch Hu says, no, not for you. You have to stay. And Yitzchak becomes the only one of the patriarchs who stays his entire life in the land of Canaan, in the land of Israel. He doesn't leave. And yet at the same time, Hashem says, Gur ba'aretz hazos. Let's remember what we said about the two words that are usually used for living somewhere. Vayeshev means comfortably to live somewhere. Lagur means what? To temporarily or discomfort. So even though he never leaves the land of Israel, he's never completely comfortable where he is. And one wonders whether it's the effect of the Akedah, and the Rashi actually says, if you take a look at the second page, Al tered Mitzrayim, shoyadato loredes Mitzrayim, don't go down to Egypt, because it was his intent to go to Egypt, Kamo sheyorad Ovid b'nei Rav, as his father did in the days of famine. Amar lo al tered Mitzrayim, shato olot mimo, ve'in chutza la'aretz kedai lo. I'm sorry. That's me. In the middle of teaching now. Sorry. I don't know. She does. She works today and does volunteer. Sure. Okay, sure. Sorry about that. Let me just. So Hashem says, the outside the land is not fit for you. You're an olah tamima. You're a pure offering because you were on the mizbeach. But one way to look at that, and again, I'm not suggesting that this is Rashi or the Medrash, but one way to look at that is that Yitzchak, as a survivor, cannot live on promises. He needs concrete. He needs something real. And therefore, he cannot be forced to leave Eretz Canaan with the promise of return. He has to stay there. He has to be there. It must be concrete for him. If you think of the survivors we know of the Shoah, the things they gravitate to very often, and again I'm generalizing, are the concrete and the real. I remember, for example, being at the first survivors conference in Washington, and I am not a survivor nor a child of survivors, but I went as a rabbi. And every time one of the things that I remember so clearly is that we were in RFK Stadium, and dignitaries were speaking to us, and every time the land of Israel or state of Israel was mentioned, there was like a swell in the crowd, and everybody stood up and screamed. And there was this sense that if you saw an IDF soldier, survivors couldn't believe that there were soldiers defending the land of Israel. And it was so important for them. It was so important for us as a people to have that concrete land at the time that we did, at the time after the Shoah. So therefore, a way to look at this is that Yitzchak requires the concrete. That also explains something we probably will talk about next week a little bit more in depth, and that is Yitzchak's gravitation towards which son? He's gravitating towards strength. He's gravitating towards the Zion. He's gravitating towards the one. It's not the one who's sitting and learning in the tents that captures his heart. It's the strength of the IDF soldier. It's the strength of Esav that captures him. And that may be as a result of the trauma of the Akedah. That may be that he is the first of the bound. He's the first of the survivors. He's the first one to go through this kind of experience. So, therefore, I write down here, only patriarch never to leave Canaan, relationship to the land tentative nonetheless. How might the Akedah have affected his need to remain? And we're suggesting it affected it by needing the concrete. And I would add that also preference for Esav might well, I didn't write that down, but that might well be understood in that way as well.
What is tentative?
Tentative means not firm. He's not totally comfortable with that. It's tentative.
It's not long term.
Why is it tentative? Because
He said he can't leave. The land is his.
Hashem says to him, the land is yours, but he himself.
He can't leave and he's still not
He himself
comfortable.
feels ambiguous.
Yes, he feels tentative.
Why?
Because it says gur barts. He never feels totally comfortable in the land.
Why not?
Why not? Because again, I don't. We're postulating. Let's recognize that we're postulating. But one could argue that perhaps as someone who survived the trauma of the Akedah, it's very hard for him to find full comfort in any one place.
Anywhere.
Right.
Or outside of the land.
Or outside of the land, it would have been worse.
Well, he can't go
Right?
outside.
But also, I think we have to understand the background. At that time of the Isaac, he was surrounded or living among the Canaanites.
Right.
He's not totally have a victory yet.
No, he's again. We'll see how he deals with that in a little while. Okay, so this is what I would suggest is force number one. Force number one in understanding Yitzchak is to understand him as a survivor of the Akedah and to recognize some of the effect that the Akedah might have had upon him in terms of his relationship with those around him and in terms of his relationship with the land. I'll take one question, yes.
I just feel that his name means laughter, and yet he's like the midah of strength.
Right.
That's also
Interesting. Name, yes, one other thing.
What about Yishmael? Maybe he had an impact on you.
Maybe did Yishmael have an impact on Yitzchak as well? That very good. And the sending away of Yishmael, 100%. Right now, the second force that I want us to look at is we're going to look at in a longer and deeper way, and that is that Yitzchak is very much his father's son. If you take a look at the first pasuk in Parshas Toldos, Ve'ele Toldos Yitzchak ben Abraham, Abraham holid es Yitzchak. That's a very strange sentence, right? These are the generations of Yitzchak, the son of Avram. Avram gave birth, or birthed Yitzchak. First of all, the women here will rebel, right? Because it he did not carry Yitzchak nor give birth to him. But what does it mean, Avram holid es Yitzchak? So the answer seems to be, one would argue, that Yitzchak was shaped very much by Avraham, by who he was, and by his actions. And we can look at a whole series of events that occur in Yitzchak's life that parallel the series of events that occurred in Abraham's life. Take a look at the list. Childlessness, and the need to pray for a child. 2 sons, one of them wayward. Famine. When he goes to the land of the Plishtim, he will ask his wife Rivka to say that she's his sister, same way that Avram did with Sarah. He will I wrote covenant with Avimelech, but we'll see that that's not necessarily the case. But he does have an interface with Avimelech that seems to be the same at face value as the one that his father had before him, a generation earlier. He digs wells, and his father dug wells. And he will dig the wells that his father dug, call them by the name. So what you have is a man who is going to live a life that in many ways parallels the life of Avram. And therefore, Avram holid es Yitzchak. To underscore this and to make it even more powerful, his relationship with God seems to be predicated upon the relationship that Avram had with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Look again at what the Torah says. The bottom of the page 2, Vayira, Baretz, Ravad, the same section. We're looking at the same section where Hashem tells him not to go to Mitzrayim, but we're looking at the end of that section. Turn to the next page. V'hakimosi es hashvua asher nishvati li'Avram avicha. It says, stay in this land. I will be with you and with your generations, and I'll give you all of these lands, and I will fulfill the shvuah that I made to Abraham, your father. I'll make your children as numerous as the stars, etc., etc. Ekev asher shama Abraham bikoli. Why will I do this? Because Abraham listened to me. If I'm Yitzchak, I'm going, what am I, chopped liver? Right? In other words, it seems that Hashem recognizes Yitzchak's gravitation to Abraham, and therefore is predicating all that he's promising to Yitzchak, he's predicating it on Abraham, and saying, because Abraham did X, Y, and Z, and you you see Abraham as this large figure in your life, understand that you will be the fulfillment, or you will see the fulfillment of his promise. Yes.
Maybe another way of looking at this, which is that Yitzchak is, which I never thought of before, thinking of what effect the Akeda had on him.
Louder.
That
Excuse
the
me.
Akeda made him very close to not being a believer. And not doing what Abraham did. In other words, even this pasuk, he says, Abraham believed that Abraham caused him to be the way he was, which having problems. And then he has to recover from that.
So you're saying that it's possible that because of the Akedah he was traumatized and would not have followed Abraham's
That's what I was
ways,
just-
and Hashem is pushing him to do so. Interesting. Yeah,
Or
okay.
acknowledges his
All right. Then quickly, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so, I think we've seen in other frameworks of ideology that there's very strong beginnings, but the question is how far is that going to be able to continue afterwards?
Right.
And in a certain way, that's what happened here. We see where he was injured and things like that, but that allowed the second generation. If you
Okay.
even think
I'm
about
going to come back to what you're
Yeah.
saying. I'm going to come back to what you're saying. What you're talking about is continuity here. And
even though it seemed like he was the opposite
Right.
of Abraham, still,
right, he's continuing.
okay.
Okay, yes.
I just want to continue that point. We talk in Rav Kook, we talk about the father and the son. I always saw as a similar thing where the father was the one who wrote and the son was the one who wrote it down and continued.
All right,
And-
we're going
and
to talk
so that
about
was
that. We're
very-
going to talk about Yitzchak's unique place in the
bear.
panoply of
Excuse me.
the tradition. We'll see that in a minute. Yes,
Because
let's
I know,
go.
I would think, would that a normal person have resentment towards someone who was prepared to
So
to
does
kill him?
Yitzchak harbor resentment against
I
Abraham?
would imagine if he was
Apparently,
normal, he would, but I
Normally
think
would, but we
his
don't.
trauma caused him to be not so normal.
Right, well, we don't see. Look,
depends
again,
on his level of
we're
understanding.
postulating, and we've got to postulate carefully. We're suggesting that he's affected by the Akedah, that there may be many ways, but we also see this tendency on his part to relive the experiences of his father, and we see the tendency on the part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to predicate his promises on the promises given to Abraham. Okay, I'll take one more comment. Yes.
I'm going to take issue with your choice of vocabulary. I'm not arguing with the idea. Yitzchak affirms the choices. He chooses to live the life of Abraham.
Okay.
And Hashem affirms his choices
All right.
in that way.
Okay.
It's a
Very
sort of
good.
recognition.
Very good. What you're suggesting is that this is Yitzchak shows an affirmation of Abraham, and Hashem echoes that affirmation in his words. Take a look at a fascinating medrash, and that is Ad Abraham lo haya zikna. You see it? Next to last, Hebrews 10 on page number 3. Page number 3. Man dahave boy lemishtoi bahade Abraham mishtoi bahade Yitzchak mishtoi bahade Abraham. Until Abraham's time, there was no old age. You just got old and died, but you stayed young. However, what was happening was Yitzchak looked like his father so much that people who wanted to go to Yitzchak went to Abraham, and people who wanted to go to Abraham went to Yitzchak. So Abraham prayed for old age to allow there to be a distinction between him and his son. All right, now we owe it all to Abraham. Now, but again, take the medrash literally, or take it as Yitzchak is struggling to get out of the shadow of his father. In other words, Yitzchak is struggling to get out of. So now we can stop for a minute and ask ourselves, what is Yitzchak's unique challenge in this tradition? What is he the first of? We said he's the first of the bound, but he's the first of something else.
To pass down the Masorah.
He is the first one to receive tradition, not just from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but from his parents. Right? And that means that his challenge is the challenge of Mesorah. His challenge is uniquely that of, as you said, very well, continuity. But I'm gonna challenge you guys for a second and ask you a question. Define for me the word Mesorah.
It's tradition.
Passed down.
Right? What does it mean?
Transmission.
To pass
Would
down.
you say that I'll give you a definition. Mesorah means to take from one generation and pass it down to the next. Is that the definition of Mesorah?
And values passed.
Right?
Part of it.
All right, yeah.
With your own variation.
There is a third step that you're leaving out. Mesorah means to receive from one generation, to have it course through you and your life and your experience, and then to hand it down. So that each generation, each individual, each family, everybody's making their contribution to the panoply of tradition, to this great tradition that's gefilte fish is not written in the Torah. Right? Shalent is not found in Navi.
Bagels and
Bagels and I'm choosing foods, other things. What are we saying? We are the products of that which is unchanging, but we are also the products of that which changes. And as tradition courses through someone's life, and as tradition courses through your family and you are subtly changing that tradition and handing it down to the next generation with your contributions. And that's what Yitzchak's struggling with here. Yitzchak shouldn't be just a mirror of his father's events. Yitzchak shouldn't just be an affirmation of the tradition of Abraham. Yitzchak should be someone who is making his own contribution to that tradition, and I believe that Yitzchak struggles to do that. And we'll see now how that struggle emerges. Yes?
And that struggle is his contribution.
That's correct.
The idea of struggling is his contribution to the Mesorah.
That is part of it. That is part of it, but we'll see that there may be more. It may not just be the struggle, it may be what the struggle creates. Take a look, for example, and to underscore this, just take a look at something very interesting. Talmud Bavli talks about how each of it's the last section on page 3, how each of the patriarchs referred to Har Habayis, referred to the mountain of the Beis Hamikdash. And Avram referred to it as a har, Yitzchak as a sadeh, and Yaakov as a bayis. All right? And they base this on statements in the Torah. Yitzchak goes in lasuach v'sadeh. Yitzchak goes out to daven or to talk to God in the field. But each of these symbols is symbolic of the unique challenge of that individual. Avram is the one who climbs the mountain of faith. He's the pioneer. Yitzchak tills the field, the sadeh. Yaakov builds a bayis. He's the only one who all of his children follow his ways. So Yaakov finally creates the home. So the Medrash is telling you these were the ways that they referred to the Har Habayis, but the Medrash is also suggesting, I think, that these are ways in which to look at their unique contributions to the process of Mesorah. Now turn the page. So, do we see Yitzchak reaching his own potential, making his own mark? So first of all, you can see that he digs the wells, and it says on section number 1, Vayelech Hashem Yitzchak vayichan, etc. Vayashav Yitzchak vayachpor es be'eros hamayim asher chafru b'mei Avraham. He redigs the wells that his father dug, and he calls them by the names that his father called them. So at that point, he is still mirroring his father's, or affirming his father's contribution. Now the wells, by the way, are both important in terms of of the reality, the concrete reality, and also what they symbolize. The reality is water is more important than oil in this area, right? Water, the fact that you find be'er mayim and you're digging wells and you're trying to find water, right? You always wonder, how is the Kinneret? What's happening? Is it full? Is it not? So there's, even though now we have other ways of creating palatable water, salinization, etc., water remains very important. At the same time, there's a medrash, the medrashim say that the wells represent the Batei Mikdash, or represent other things. So one way or the other, he's digging the wells that his father dug, and he's calling them by the names that his father called them. Then at the end of that paragraph, Vayachpuru be'er ha'cheretz, vayorivu gam aleho, vayetok misham vayachpuru ha'cheretz v'lovra. So he digs at the end, he digs his own wells. So therefore he's making his own mark. It's not just the copying of his father's or the affirming of his father's tradition, but the wells he digs are his own as well. But what I find most fascinating, and this has very much current application to our own experience as well, is the contrast between how Yitzchak deals with Avimelech and Abraham deals with Avimelech. And now we've had this before. Some of you may not have been here, so I want to review. In Abraham's life, he makes a bris, a covenant with Avimelech. Avimelech, the king of the Philistines, the Plishtim. Take a look at, you'll see a summary, not all the sentences, it's a much longer section. Vayi Yisahi Vayomer Avimelech ufichol tzar tzvo. All right, Avimelech and Fichol, the head of his army, come, and they say, we see God is with you. Va'ata yishava li be'elokim im tishkor li ulanini ulanechti. Promise me you won't deal falsely with me or my son or my... And the chesed asher osisi imach taseh imadi, like I've treated you well, you should treat us. Vayomer Avraham anochi yishaveach. And Avram immediately says, I will swear. I agree. He then remonstrates Avimelech, but he goes on, and if you look at the underlined section, Vayichruzu shnei and bris, they make a covenant. On the next page, it is reiterated. Vayichruzu shnei and bris. So, yes, Avram makes a covenant with Avimelech, and that covenant is, by the way, seen in a very negative way by Chazal. Chazal will remonstrate Abraham for it, saying you never should have made the covenant with the likes of Avimelech. Some of you will remember that we learned the Rashbam, who said that, and the Rashbam is a revolutionary approach to this. The next event after this covenant is the Akedah, and it says Vayi Acharad Vorim Oyelet, connects it to the bris. And the Rashbam says that the Akedah is partially a response to the bris. You, according to the Rashbam, God turns to Avram and says, you were willing to endanger your son by creating an intergenerational covenant with the likes of Avimelech. Now I'm going to show you what it would feel like to lose that son. And the Rashbam sees it as a course correction for Yitzchak in terms of his life. Avram in terms of his life, and sure enough, in the next parsha, Avram is much more focused on his own family and not on the world. Even though that's not a negation of his preaching to the world, but it's a refocus on the importance of his family. All right. Then, now we come to a section in Parshas Toldos, and let's just read it. And then we'll take a look at the questions. V'Avimelech halach elov migrot. This is Avimelech now on page 5, the second part of the second paragraph. Right? Avimelech comes from Gror, and he's coming now. This is to Yitzchak. Coming to Yitzchak. Vayomer aleim Yitzchak madua bosem elai v'atem sneisem usi v'tishalchuni meichem. Yitzchak says, why are you coming to me? You hated me and you expelled me, you exiled me from your land. Vayomru ro ra'inu kai Hashem imach v'hasher tihav alad beinuseinu beinenu. We saw that God is with you. Right? Where have we heard this before? Right? This seems to be a parallel. This at face value seems to be what? A parallel event. Right? Once again to what happened to Avram. At face value, it seems to be parallel. We didn't hurt you, we sent you out in peace. They make promises one to the other, and Yitzchak sends them on their way. Alright, now, at face value, you can read this 10 times and say, this is what happened to Avram. Same thing, right? The covenant is created between Avimelech. But take a look at the next page, at the series of questions, and then we'll come back to it again. We'll look at the paragraph again. Are these two events the same? What word is missing in Yitzchak's agreement? How is his agreement more limited than his father's? Do Yitzchak and Avimelech disagree on the facts? What is the nature of their disagreement? How does Yitzchak handle their differences? So those are the questions we're going to look at. Let's go back now to the paragraph. So the first thing we see, Avimelech comes to Yitzchak and says, now I want to make a covenant with you because God is with you. So what's the first thing we see? Exactly. The covenant that was made with Abraham was supposed to be intergenerational. If there's supposed to be an intergenerational covenant, why do I have to make another covenant now? Because obviously that intergenerational covenant did not hold. Right? And the way in which they treated Yitzchak did not reflect that grace. Okay? So Yitzchak says, Madua basem elai vatem sneisem osi vatashalchuni meichem. Yitzchak says, why have you come to me, and you hated me, and you sent me from you? Vayomru ra'o ra'inu k'Hashem imach urimcha v'kasher na'aseh v'nemar tino Allah beinusenu beinenu v'beincha v'nichroso bris imach. So first of all, you see that there is a limitation here. They are not asking for an intergenerational covenant. They're saying, let there be an agreement between us, a covenant between us, because I guess they have to acknowledge that the intergenerationality didn't work. So you can't say we're going to do that if it doesn't work. But now I'll ask you a question. Look at it carefully. Do Avimelech and Yitzchak disagree on the facts or not?
I think they disagree on the terminology.
They disagree on the terminology, okay?
Because it's very clear
but do they disagree on the facts?
No, doesn't seem like it.
No, the facts are clear. Yitzchak said, you sent me away, and they say, we sent you away. Right? They both agree. They agree. There is a full agreement here as to the facts. What is the disagreement about? The interpretation of those facts. What those facts mean. Right? Yitzchak says, Sneisem osi vatishalfuni ve'itchem. You hated me and you sent me away. What do they say? Im ta'asem manura kasher lo nenganucha v'kasher asinu imcha rak tov unshalechacha b'shalom. Don't do evil to us like we did not touch you or harm you. And we only did good to you and we sent you away in peace.
Sounds like today.
If we hated you, we would have what? We would have killed you. What do you mean? We love you. We love you.
With rocks.
Huh? Yes.
I think it seems to be that the covenant between Avimelech and Abraham was basically based on the fact that Abraham's son Yitzchak would have the same status as his father did.
Uh-huh.
And this was a trial period. They did not know that. Avram was successful no matter what, and it became obvious to everybody that he was a very special person.
Right.
But Avimelech did not know that Yitzchak was going to be that way, so he sent him away to see if he's special. We'll find out he's special.
All right, interesting. In other words, you're saying that it was a trial period to see how Yitzchak is seen. I see it a bit differently. I see it as they are saying, we agree on the facts, we just disagree on one thing. What is the definition of peace? That's what we disagree on. According to Avimelech, peace is I don't kill you.
Right.
According to Yitzchak, peace is peace, right? We can live together. So you are talking totally different. You're speaking totally different languages here. In other words, I'm talking about in one world, and you're talking in another world, because we just don't see eye to eye. We don't see eye to eye. We did not hurt you. We loved you. You sent me away. You hate me. Two very different interpretations of the same fact.
It's almost like the current situation.
Well, yes.
Israel always want coexistence peacefully.
Things don't change, right? But how do we view peace? How does Egypt view peace? How do we view peace? How does Jordan view peace? Right? What is the definition of peace?
They want a piece of us.
All right. All right. So what happens when Yitzchak is confronted with this disparity between his interpretation of the facts and their interpretation? What does he do? Look at the very next puzzle. He stops talking. Right? Negotiations are over. Right? And he makes a party. Right? So in other words,
He
accepts it, but he doesn't accept it. He doesn't continue the negotiation. Let's remember, he's also in a very dangerous situation. These guys are here, so he says, I can't continue to negotiate with them because there's nothing to negotiate. We're living in two different worlds. So instead of trying to negotiate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make believe it's all okay. And I'll throw a party. And what word is absent here that is found in Avram's case? Agreement. There is no covenant. They asked for it. They say, they ask him for a bris, they ask him for a covenant, but at no point at the end of this event does it say, Vayichrusu Shnei Bris, as it does by Abraham, because there is no covenant. Yitzchak is too smart for that. So here you see Yitzchak emerging from Abraham's shadow. Here, I believe, is the case most clearly where you see Yitzchak making his own mark and saying, I'm not going to fall into the same trap that my father fell into. And I'm going to recognize who I'm dealing with. And the irony comes about in the last puzzle. Vayashkimu vaboker, vayishavu ish liachiv. Yes, sorry. They ask. That's where they're asking for it. That's right. That's where they're saying, "Let there be a covenant." But nowhere does it say by Yukrusu that there's a covenant is signed. In the case, right? They asked for it, but there's no covenant. So therefore, vayashkimu baboker, vayishavu ish liachiv. They make these promises between each other. Not a bris, not a covenant. Right? And a covenant is much stronger. And then, what happens? Vayishavu ish liachiv, vayishalchem Yitzchak, vayelchu me'ito b'shalom.
Wait. What was the point of the party? I don't get it.
The point of the party is to
diffuse tensions,
to take your attention away from the negotiations, to just enjoy, to say, what a wonderful thing it is to have ourselves together. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, it's to celebrate, but you're celebrating nothing.
Please kill the celebrate, not to kill.
The fact that it ended up with the word shalom and then sent them away.
Well, look at Shalem. Look at the irony. The irony is, what does he do?
Exactly what
He
they
does
did.
exactly what they did to him. Right? And he does it bishalom according to their definition of peace. So in other words, he's basically saying,
connected with them.
I have my boundaries. I'm not going to be totally intertwined with them. I'm sending them away from me, just like they sent me away from them. Right? And I'm sending them away bishalom according to their definition of peace. Right? So it's brilliant. It's suddenly, you see, if you take a look at the Torah text, it's brilliant how the nuances change the whole story. This is not Abraham's peace. This is not Abraham's covenant. This is much more limited, and it is a recognition of the limitation of the relationship. And by the way, you do not find Chazal criticizing Yitzchak the way they criticize Abraham when it comes to this interchange. Because they understand that this is not an intergenerational relationship, it's not a bris, it's not a covenant, and he's limited. Yes?
I mean, to put it plainly, it's an episode of negotiation without a treaty.
That's correct. That's correct. It's an episode of negotiation without a treaty, but he's got to sort of hide that from them somehow, and that's the mishtet. Yes?
So what do you make of the fact that it says that they swore to one another?
It means that they made agreements. But
A verbal agreement, which is useless.
they made agreements. They promised we won't harm you, we won't do any. But they make a bris, a covenant, is a statement of relationship between us. The two of us are together. That we're friends. That we're going to. None of that. Right? Yishavu. It's basically similar.
Because what you're saying is that with the episode of Abraham, there was this covenant. When they came to Yitzchak, they didn't abide by
They didn't abide by the covenant.
So he's not going to be fooled me again.
That's correct. That's correct. He's learning from his father's error, as it were, it seems. And at least the error that Chazal say it was an error. And he himself is saying, I'm not going to be pulled into the same morass that yeah.
Sorry, one more comment. So, what is the relationship between the Abraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov with the Plishtim thereafter? Because they kind of disappear from the story.
Basically, that's it. In other words, it seems that this agreement solidifies their separate lives, their separate being. They're not intertwined the way they might have been if there was a real bris.
Well, so Yitzchak didn't go to them and say, look, my father made a bris with you and includes me, and look what you're doing.
In a sense, he does. In the first thing he does, as soon as they come to him, he doesn't refer back to Avram. He says, "Well, what are you coming to me for?"
Yeah, but every time he dug a well, they claimed it was theirs.
That's right.
So he didn't invoke the covenant that Avram made with
He's not invoking it. He basically is saying, "What are you coming to me for? You treated me poorly. You treated me poorly."
Well, maybe he's saying, he sent them away completely.
Well, that's correct. But in their definition of peace, which is a relationship that does not exist. Yes.
Let me make sure I'm not offending any historical or policy of the state of Israel. But I feel like this situation is almost like remind us current situation. Just before the Hamas attack Israel, Abraham Accord was almost fulfilled. Ironically, the name of the agreement was Abraham's Accord. Now because of the jealousy of the Hamas, Israel actually going war and still in the war.
All right.
So there's no agreement.
There's no agreement.
That's for sure.
That's for sure. That's for sure. In other words, what do we learn from here? We learn from here that you have to know your enemy. Right? That you have to know your enemy. And that if your enemy is such that you have that your language, the world in which you live is totally different from the world in which they live, then you cannot create a covenant. You cannot create an agreement. You're not going to be able to. That can't be done. All right. I've got one more comment. Okay. So let's just briefly review. We've looked at Yitzchak, and we're trying to find a picture of this patriarch who serves as the continuity, as the first one who has the challenge of Masorah, the first one who has the challenge of tradition in Jewish thought. He's the first one who receives from one generation, it courses through him, and it goes through the next. We've learned that the definition of Masorah requires that third step. That's probably one of the most important things that I'm teaching today. That when it comes to Masorah, it's not just taking and handing down, it's taking, making it your own, and handing it down. And therefore, Masorah includes that third step. We've seen Yitzchak struggling to emerge from outside of the shadow of his father. We see him repeating all of the same events. We also spoke about how the Akedah might have had an effect upon him. So these are all, we're postulating. But finally, the last section is not postulating. The last section, we really see a fascinating difference between the way Yitzchak deals with Avimelech and the way Avram dealt with Avimelech. And we see that Yitzchak is capable to understand his enemy, and therefore more able to limit the agreements he makes with them, send them away, saying that's your definition of peace. Well, let that be the definition of peace between us, and he goes on. We're going to take a look next week, Be'ezras Hashem, at Yitzchak again, but we're going to look at Yitzchak in particular in the way in which he deals with the bracha to Yaakov and to Esau, and what happens with that whole event. There are a series of questions which for homework you might think about, and that is, what does the bracha represent? And Rivka wants Yaakov to get this bracha, even though in a way she wants him to masquerade as Esau, so that Yitzchak will think he's blessing Esau, and actually bless Yaakov. What's the meaning of a bracha given in error? Why is that? Why is it just because I say something I think you're a different child and I say it, then that there's so much to talk about in that story. So hopefully we'll have a chance to take a look at that. All right, one last piece of housekeeping. We're starting to move into the Pesach season. I brought two copies of a Haggadah that I edited and wrote, which is for sale. If you are interested, please take a look at it, and let me know, and I'll make sure that you get a copy.